it's not only just the being explained by the language of Jim Crow or different tropes that we use to identify white supremacy today. It's the fact that neoliberals actually have co-opted that language masterfully and
No,
have
that's right.
used it against black particularly poor working class black people to the detriment. Like we see this narrative that's been woven against Bernie Sanders, and it was a masterful stroke just from a political observer perspective. The idea that Bernie Sanders could not possibly understand the plight of black people, even though he was carrying a message of economic justice, versus
Right.
Hillary Clinton, who obviously understands black people, even though she was carrying a message of economic neoliberalism, which is obviously detrimental to black people. They have mastered this art form. And by they, I'm talking about black people who are
Oh yeah.
leveraging this against black people. Speak to that for me.
Oh yeah. No, no, look. I mean, no question, man. I mean, yeah. I mean, no question. At all. And I mean, on the Clinton thing too. Well, I had 2 points to make about this. One of them is that back in the day, right? Like when I was young and when stuff like this could be a real issue. I looked at the ways that some of those showboat moves got made on Sanders. I said to friends, I said, if something like this had happened, like in the late '60s or in the early '70s, the first thought would be that this is a police action, right? But and I'm not really even trying to say in a coy way that that's what it is now. But you're right. I mean, and it works well. Just to underscore your point, like you remember, and I'm sure that many of the viewers do too, that at one point, I think a couple months ago, when Clinton said someplace, if you break up the banks, that wouldn't end racism and
Yes.
it wouldn't end sexism, right? And that just said to me very clearly, okay, so this is the way they want to play it,
Yeah.
right? And and my good friend Professor Willie Leggett, who's a political scientist and old friend and comrade of mine since graduate school, who teaches at South Carolina State, is author of one of the most powerful and significant lines in the last generation in the study of black politics. Said a number of years ago, I quote it every time I get a chance, that the only thing that hasn't changed about black politics since 1965 is how we think about it.
Hmm.
But he also pointed out, last time I was down there, he had found this really great statement. I can email it to you after you get off the air, but from V.O. Key in his classic, 1949 book, Southern Politics in State and Nation. And what he quoted to me was what Key said about the role that race played in South Carolina politics in 1949. And it was kind of standard understanding that race was a way to deflect attention from the fact that all of the elements in South Carolina politics in the mainstream, of course then it was a one-party state, were in a league with rich people, capital, and the employer class, and race was a way to deflect attention
Mm-hmm.
from the fact that that's the interest that they were governing on behalf of. And Willie's point was that you could look at what was happening, and this was like when we were building up to the South Carolina primary. His point was you could look at what was happening in South Carolina politics at today and say a version of the same thing with slight modifications
Mm-hmm.
to accommodate the fact that it wasn't just whites motivating anti-black racism, but it was like black politicians as well who use race to draw black voters' attention away from the fact that they also are governing on behalf of the ruling class ultimately. And I've noticed like years ago, like when we were working in South Carolina, and I think this is true of a lot of states in the South. In fact, Professor Leggett and I have like a 20-year thing going on as to which set of black politicians is the worst and most venal, and in the country. Those in South Carolina or those in Louisiana. So it's like a tribal thing. But but um, but it's been very clear that both Democrats and Republicans have a commitment to making race the only fault line in politics in that state. And the difference between 1949 and 2016 is that the black politicians and the Democrats operate in the same way. Well, not in the same way, but they have the same commitment to making the race issue central and overriding everything else, right, in the state. So, and I mean, like I said, that's true in a lot of places, and it's true in most places. I think we saw, while the dynamics in the Chicago mayoral race were more, way more complex, but the role of the black political class there in lining up behind Rahm Emanuel just kind of throws into relief where their commitments are, like in the same way that they're lining up behind Clinton is done now.
Someone, and I can't think of where I read this, but they said that the one thing that, and actually you alluded to this a few moments ago, the one good thing about this election is that it has exposed the fact that the Democratic, the black Democratic establishment is all but inseparable from the Democratic Party, right? These black leaders that we look at to do things that are in the best interest of the black community, they have been fully exposed to do things that's really just in the best interest of the Democratic establishment. And I think everything that you just described really just puts a fine point on that reality. I like what you said earlier about we're playing with house money. And I in the sense that we actually are ahead of the game and not behind the game, but also in the sense that this election has exposed a lot to people who may have been asleep to the reality of politicians that they've placed their trust in and where their alliances really lie.